In Denmark, if you're an expectant mother, you're entitled to 4 weeks pre-birth paid leave and 14 weeks paid of maternity leave. And then you're entitled to a collective 32 weeks as a couple. But in the US, nada. I'm Mallory Hagan.
And I'm Maggie Gehlsen-Burnett, and this is Pretty Furious.
This episode is brought to you by Basic. Located in the heart of downtown Birmingham, Alabama, Basic is a 100% women-owned and run, slow fashion and ethical lifestyle store. All apparel, art, and decor at Basic is responsibly made by individuals paid living wages within dignified working spaces. In addition, they donate a portion of every sale to human rights efforts. Visit Basic in person, downtown Birmingham, Alabama, or at www.abasicshop.com. Use code PRETTYFURIOUS for 15% off your first purchase.
Mallory.
Maggie.
Wanting to have kids in Trump's America. What a sick time.
How are you feeling about that? Don't you wish we had 32 paid weeks of leave collectively?
The 4 weeks pre-maternity, that's amazing. That's incredible.
I actually didn't know that until I looked it up.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I would really appreciate that. But yeah, so many conflicting feelings about wanting children in Trump's America. I think there's obviously there's the very glaringly obvious picture of just women's health and healthcare question mark. Do we still have that? And just sort of what that looks like on a state by state basis if you do have something that happens during pregnancy. I think that's really where my head goes, first and foremost. And then obviously the second large piece of, I don't know, if you have a girl and raising a woman, raising a daughter in Trump's America, super sick. So yeah, that's kind of where my head's at. It's a really weird place to be, I think, to want children right now, or to still have that desire, right?
I totally understand. I think it's a conversation my husband and I have had. Anyone who follows me online knows that we have began the process of trying to start a family, or trying to add to our family, rather. And one of my greatest fears, is that I live in Alabama and the landscape of maternal health care here is abysmal. It's horrendous. I am 36 years old, so that adds to the risk factor of becoming pregnant. But also, as you mentioned, just bringing another human onto this planet in this shit show is a little terrifying, but I don't know if this helps. One thing I decided is that the greatest act of resistance that I can muster is to raise a good human who cares about the world around them and who will not be red-pilled by Trump's America, and who will be a contributing member of society in the best way we know how.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We also just can't let the other side be the only people having babies. Then we're guaranteed for doom.
Weren't we talking about that last week, maybe privately, that I was someone commented on that video of mine and was we can't just let the red keep having babies.
Yes.
That's actually such a fair point. We need to balance the scales.
Speaking of comments, you guys should go follow us. We're at Pretty Furious Pod everywhere you could possibly find us. So TikTok, Instagram. Well, maybe not Facebook. We're not on the Book of Face. Maybe because our faces are younger than 65.
Yeah, that's probably for the best, honestly. But that might be a fun place for some rage bait later on. So we'll circle back to the Facebook.
We did learn that the mad faces on Facebook are 5 times more likely to get engagement. Thanks to Katie and Caro of Diabolical Lies, which it sounds like now our podcast is just going to be an ongoing promotion of theirs. They're welcome.
If we could get a discount code, that'd be sick.
Speaking of our faces, we can't be pretty furious without first being pretty. So we talk about products every week that we love. And this week, Maggie, what do you got?
So I just got a new little tub of this. This is the Medicube Collagen Jelly Cream. So this is, first of all, I just want to point out that this is a massive container. It's half my face just for size.
That is big.
And I think that this was like $17 maybe. It is one of the best moisturizers I've ever used, especially in the winter, especially if you live somewhere cold. I'm in Illinois. So if you live somewhere where it's snowy and gloomy and gross out and your skin's dry, you need this moisturizer in your life. It's thick, but still is light on the skin. I can't even, it's magical. I'm obsessed with it. So, and it comes with this like cute little
A
spoon
little
thing.
scooper thing.
Yeah, I love that.
Do you ever actually use those? I get them and then I'm annoyed by them, so I end up throwing. I know you're supposed to, it's like more hygienic or something. I don't know.
This is the only one I use. Full
Got it.
transparency. This one, and then I use one for like this one specific face mask I have, but that's literally it. So I do actually use this one.
Okay, so my product, I actually think, if I remember correctly, was influenced by you. It
Oh, I
was
can't
one
wait.
of your products from a video that you said is actually worth it. This, the Skinny Confidential
Yes.
ice roller. Is that what it's called?
Yes,
Ice
it
roller?
is. Yeah, the ice roller.
So you influenced me and I am so grateful for it. Every day you picture this, right? I wake up, I rub my eyes, I throw on my ugly robe, the ugliest thing that I own. I can't believe my husband loves me, honestly. And then I go to my freezer and I pick this thing up and I put it in the pocket of my robe. And I
Mhm.
make my coffee and I like do whatever I need to do. And then about 15 minutes later, after it's had time to not be so frozen, then
Yeah.
rub the face. I love this thing. It's amazing. And you
So
know what though? It's kind of pricey.
it's super
They're
pricey,
like
and I
70.
will.
Are they like $70?
They're like $70, yeah. And I will just say that I have since learned information about that brand and like
Oh
the
no.
people who own it, yes, and Dear Media, the company that's like also affiliated with.
Oh, they're
Yeah,
connected.
yeah, that's her. So Lauren Bostic owns
Forget
Skinny
it. Forget
Confidential.
my product.
And then no, but I will tell you there are a couple really good alternatives. I think there's the brand Kitsch, KITSCH, I think, makes an aluminum one. So there's very few brands that make the aluminum ones, and the aluminum ones are amazing. It's why they actually like work and are so cold. So so I'm obsessed with mine and still use it religiously, even though I don't like the people who run the company anymore.
Damn it.
But I used to be like their biggest fan, so it's so devastating. And they have great products too, which is
I mean,
just
part of the
sucks.
reason that we started this section of the podcast was so that we could share things we love with people, but I guess also so we can shit talk brands if we need to. So just kidding, guys. Find the Kitsch one, not this one. But the idea is that you should ice roll your face.
Or just like take some ice cubes and throw them all over your
Also,
face.
don't spend $70 on something that you could probably do with a cup if you wanted to.
Oh my God, amazing. Okay, Mallory, we know that we're talking about all things mental load, child rearing, and gender equity in the home and workplace today. But first, let's hit them with the headlines. So, what headline made you pretty furious this week?
All right, Maggie. Right in line with your fear of having children.
Yay!
Are you ready? I don't think this is going to help, actually. I'm sorry.
I'm so
It's
ready.
also not funny. I'm just tickled about our beauty product. Okay, so this headline is from CNN, and it reads, abortion bans in the United States led to more births and also more infant deaths, especially among vulnerable groups.
Shocker.
So no
Crazy.
one's surprised. In the states across the country where a 6-week abortion ban was implemented, the fertility rate increased 1.7%. So we are, in fact, having more babies. But the same research team that conducted that research found that there is a rise in infant mortality and that it has spiked nearly 6% in the
Jesus.
states that implemented those bans. Yay, Republican lawmaker, you are officially the reason that more women and babies are dying.
I love when men make decisions about women's bodies. It's my favorite.
Listen, I'd like to say men, but it's not just men. We have some
It is men.
Republican women lawmakers in Alabama that make me want to jump off my house.
Yeah, you're actually right. That's fair. Yeah. It is. It is women as well.
Yeah. All
That's
right, what's your
insane.
headline? Did you
Okay.
bring a credible source this time?
I sure did.
Thank you.
This is from The Guardian. And this, what was the community or something.com? Yeah, I don't know, man. Okay. This one says Missouri lawmaker proposes registry of pregnant women quote, at risk for abortions. The bill's author characterized this as a, quote, eHarmony for babies that could help match adoptive parents with babies. There are so many things in here. It's called the Save Missouri Babies Act. I don't understand what makes somebody, quote, at risk for having an abortion. Like, do they have blue hair? They're a registered Democrat. What are we doing here? So there's that piece of it that is very interesting. I will be super excited to hear about the Republicans' plan for determining what the risk factors are for somebody who is, quote, at risk for having an abortion. Super psyched for that. And then also just dubbing it as like an eHarmony for babies is like the most diabolical material I've actually
like
ever
you're just
heard
on
of.
Bumble, like swiping pregnant teen moms.
You're like swiping, like, is there going to be like I'm just so curious. Is there a profile? What does the profile include? It's insane. So yeah, super lit. I'm really stoked about
Both
where
of these
women's
headlines.
healthcare is going and all
Yeah.
of this. Super fun.
Well, it's interesting though, because both of them sort of tie into the conversation we're going to have with Paige Connell. And let's bring her in, shall we?
All right, so we have Paige Connell joining us today. Paige is a working mother of 4 who shares relatable content on TikTok and Instagram. She highlights the everyday experiences of women balancing motherhood, careers, and relationships. She is known for her candid insights on the mental load of motherhood and the challenges of creating equity at home and at work. Paige's content resonates with millions, myself and Mallory included. She also advocates for affordable childcare, paid leave, and reproductive rights, sparking important conversations about what families need to thrive. Her impactful voice and relatable storytelling have led to features in Scary Mommy, The Today Show, Good Morning America, and more.
I mean, I guarantee you at some point, if you're a woman, if you're a married woman, and if you're a married woman with children, you have shared Paige's content. Maybe you didn't even realize it.
110%. Yes. You have seen it, you've shared it. You know her, you love her.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We're so glad that you're here. We have already chatted about our headlines, but we're curious, which one did you bring that made you pretty furious today?
I mean, I think it's the one we all saw, the woman who spoke out at the town hall and then was removed forcibly by men. Nobody stood up from her. And as a woman, obviously, it's infuriating and scary. And yeah, that's a headline that's making me pretty furious this morning.
Yeah, I think the idea that we're slowly watching one of the foundations of our democracy be chipped away for the freedom to speak, essentially, whether that's how we're seeing different media outlets be silenced or backtrack or banned from the Oval Office, banned from the press corps. It's starting to get kind of scary out there. The idea that you can't be in a town hall and talk to your representative without being kicked out, manhandled, is pretty crazy.
Yeah, it is. And it's more the narrative too, and kind of the way she was treated in the words that they used. I think they said something along the lines of like, the little girl doesn't like consequences for speaking up or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but she's a grown woman, not a little girl. And it sounds like reprimanding a child, right? And it feels very much like that's the narrative these days, which is kind of telling women who they are and what they need to be right now, and trying to remind them of their place in the world. And so it's scary to see that broadcast nationally for all of us.
Yeah, we belong in the kitchen, right, Paige?
Yeah. I mean, hey, we spend a lot of time everybody should be spending time in the kitchen. We got to eat, but like,
we gotta eat.
Not just women. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, we opened the show talking about the abysmal state of parental leave in the US, how there essentially is none, depending on what state you live in. Paid parental leave, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
What is your thought on that?
It's a huge disservice to parents, but I think it disproportionately obviously impacts women and mothers and birthing people. And so I live in a state that does have it. But even though we do have paid parental leave, it's not perfect. And I think there's a lot of conversation that I'm having around the paid parental leave conversation, which is like there's a layer of we all need it. And then how do we make sure men take it? Because I think that's the added layer to the paid leave conversation we don't often talk about, which is when women have children, that is kind of when they enter the most financial insecurity, right? Like women are at higher risk of financial insecurity simply for having children. Their careers stagnate, they get passed over for promotions and salary increases. And all of that starts with paid leave, really, or even unpaid leave, like women taking leave from work to become mothers or to birth children or whatever that might be. harms them ultimately in the long run. And so like part of me is like, yes, we all need paid leave, but we also need men to be taking their paid leave and to be actually taking it, not going on vacation with it, not checking into work when they're on it. Paid leave, I think, is something I think about pretty much every single day as I think about kind of gender equity as it exists right now, because I think so much of the inequities that happen between men and women as parents specifically start right then and there, kind of at the birth of the child, how we kind of show up in that moment.
How did you recognize that showing up for you in your marriage?
Yeah, became a parent a little bit different than others. I was a foster mom first and foremost. When we welcomed our two oldest kids, they were 1 and 2, so they're toddlers. And I took a leave because my boss was, and I say this like kind enough to offer me one because I was at a small company. He did not legally have to give me any kind of paid leave. The state of Massachusetts didn't require it, and also there was no PFMLA at the time. So he was nice enough to offer me 8 weeks fully paid, which was great. My husband did not get any leave. He took, I think, 2 weeks off of work with PTO, and that's all he had. And it really set up this dynamic where I kind of became this like default caregiver right off the bat because I was the one who was off. So I was researching daycares. I was taking them to their doctor's appointments. I was visiting with social workers and their biological parents. And I was doing all of that work because I was off and he was not. But also I got to bond with them more than he did. For children in foster care, I mean, it's incredibly important to have that time to bond and to build an attachment. He didn't get the same time that I did. And I will actually say for him, he hated it. He was like, I wish I could do what you're doing because our daughter at the time, she really didn't bond with him for a very, very long time because she didn't get to spend enough time with him. But with our biological children, we had children during the height of 2020 and 2022. So it was like peak COVID both times. And the first time, this is awful, but my husband got COVID like immediately after the birth of my daughter. And so he ended up being home on PTO and sick time for like several weeks longer than he would have been, which was like this weird blessing. So we had this like fake paternity leave, which was really helpful. And with our fourth, he actually got paid leave. He did. So he got paid leave through the state of Massachusetts, but it was a struggle because it's not your full pay. And we had 3 kids in daycare and you can't just, if you're in daycare, you can't just like pull them out and like pause payments. So we were getting half of his pay while he was out. And so he only ended up taking 4 weeks because it was one of those things we were trying to like just balance the cost of childcare with my needs. I had a C-section hysterectomy. So like physically I needed a lot of help from him early, So, I mean, it was amazing for him to be there and to have that time off. But I think even so, if I look back now, our expectations were very different on that 4th maternity leave. I remember him organizing his garage and me being like, you need to come inside now. I was like, you're here not to get stuff done around the house. I know there's value in that. I would love to go organize my closet right now, but there's a 4-week-old baby. So come on inside and feed her. It was a learning experience for us, but I'm lucky to have a partner who saw the value in taking that time, not just for me, but for him and his child. And if he'd had more, he would have taken it.
Yeah. You talk a lot about just the mental load, generally speaking, and how this relates to gender equity and our marriages. And so I'm curious to know if there was a sort of turning point for you in your marriage where you were thinking to yourself, this is not right. I can't keep going like this. This is not the marriage that I want to be in. If there was a moment for you where that mental load really started to take its toll and make you realize that you couldn't keep going that way.
Yeah, I think it started to show up a little bit before the birth of my 4th child. But again, circumstances were unique in the sense that prior to 2020, I went into an office every day. He went to work every day. Our kids were in daycare. And then 2020 hit and I became really the default, right? I was staying at home. I was taking care of the kids. I was working full time. I was doing the laundry and all those things while I was at home. And he still had to, he's a first responder. So he still had to go to work. He never, not once had a day off during COVID. But yeah, so we went from having like a pretty equitable division of labor to everything really falling on my shoulders. And then as the pandemic progressed, daycare would send the kids home for exposure and they'd be home for 14 days and then they'd go back and then they'd come home for 14 days. And it was always me because I worked from home. I remember kind of feeling like I was reaching a breaking point. I need help. I can't be the one doing this. And I understand, like at the time I was like, I understand your job doesn't have this flexibility. Like mine does. My job's not going to get mad at me. They're not going to fire me, but I'm exhausted and I'm burnt out and I can't keep doing this. So we figured out a different childcare solution at that time. That summer, I think she was like 2.5 months old. And I sat my husband down and I was like, I think I either want a divorce or I think we need to do something different because I am so over this. I am over having to remind you to empty the dishwasher. I am over asking you to empty the trash. My husband is a very like hands-on dad. He always has been. My husband has always been a really supportive partner, a really hands-on father in the sense that like always at dinner, always at tubby time. The thing that I think people often assume is if you're struggling with inequities in your relationship or the mental load that you have this like disengaged partner. And I didn't. I had a very active, engaged partner, a very supportive partner in the sense that he was a big cheerleader for me. He wanted me to chase my dreams. He was always very active with our kids, right? He was always doing overnights with our kids. He was always feeding them and doing tubbies with me and all of those things. But he was not the owner of any task. Like everything was my job to delegate, essentially. Something even as silly as like the diapers are out. It's like, okay, well then buy some, right? Like, why is that my job? And so there was this one day where we had that talk every couple has all the time. I need more help. Okay, how can I help? Well, you could do these things. Okay, I'm going to help. Great. And then a week later, we have a fight about the dishwasher again, right? We had done that 1,000 times. He had promised he was going to do the dishwasher and the trash. And one morning I woke up, and mind you, I do mornings by myself with all 4 kids because he leaves by like 6:15, 6:30. And so I had fed my baby. I was wearing her on my chest. I was getting my toddler changed. And I went to put her diaper in the diaper bin and it was jam packed. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't empty the trash. I start emptying the diaper genie. And as I'm pulling it out, it's stuck because it's so full. As I pulled it out, I cut my finger on the side of it. So I'm like gushing blood, bleeding everywhere. I'm doing deep breathing. I'm like, oh my gosh, don't lose your mind. And then we finally all get downstairs and I go to do breakfast and the dishwasher has not been emptied. All the plates that I need are in there. And I'm already back to work. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like it's like he doesn't see me and he doesn't respect me or care about me and my time. Because when I had texted him, I had said something like, hey, you forgot to do these things again. And he said, oh, sorry, I was running late for work. And I said, cool. Well, now I'm running late for work. I appreciate it. And it was just so obvious to me in that moment that like he did not see all of that invisible labor that I was doing and the way that his inaction was impacting me and made me feel disrespected and unloved because he wasn't respecting me. Even though I knew he loved me, it felt that way because I was like, you don't care enough to do things that you know will make my life easier. Instead, you're just making my life harder. I was like, I cannot live like this anymore. And we kind of had the big talk. And it's been almost 3 years since then. So things are much, much different now.
I think one interesting piece of this, and you brought it up and said, now I'm late for work. One thing I notice is, sure, someone might fold the clothes out of the dryer, but I'm thinking about all the hand towels in every bathroom that actually needed to get into the laundry. And the fact that the rug hasn't been washed in 6 weeks or whatever it might be, or that there's dust on all the baseboards, those need to be wiped down. There are also all these like secondary, tertiary things that are just kind of floating around in the oblivion. So what would you just suggest to someone who is hoping to have this conversation about mental load with their spouse? How do you start it in a way that's not placing blame and in a way that's productive and allows for the outcome you're hoping for?
Yeah. Well, maybe even before you get to the conversation about, I want a divorce, or, before that big sort of like ultimatum comes into play.
So I think the problem for most, I say women because this is kind of a gendered conversation in the sense that typically this dynamic exists between men and women. And when I talk about mental load, I think it's really important to state there's kind of a difference between mental load, domestic labor, right, invisible labor. They're not all the same thing, right? They all kind of fall in similar buckets, but they're not necessarily all the same. So I think that's important to talk about. And something like mental load doesn't just exist within our relationships, right? Women tend to carry mental load in like non-promotable tasks at work, right? Like women tend to carry the mental load in sibling dynamics, right? If we always joke about the eldest daughter, right? And like her responsibilities versus her brothers. And even with our parents, right? Dad, did you get mom a Mother's Day gift? That kind of mental load that tends to be defaulting towards women because women have kind of been conditioned to be caregivers and to give of themselves. And so I think that is actually where I start. I think it's really hard to have these conversations when you're drowning in it without having the information and the tools to articulate what's happening. I wish every woman and man would do this before marriage and kids, but it's kind of like breaking down these ideas and societal conditioning that we experience growing up in a patriarchy, right? Growing up in the US in particular, knowing that I made a video a while ago that said, stop doing things for your boyfriend that he can do for himself, because I met my husband in high school and I used to just do things for him just to like be nice, but then it became an expectation, right? And it's like, why was my conditioning that I should do things for him to make his life easier, but his conditioning was not necessarily the same for me. And so I actually think if we can start kind of breaking down these ideas and the societal conditioning about what it means to be a good wife, a good mother, a good woman in general, what it means to be a good man, a good husband, a good dad. Because also when you ask men, what did people tell you about being a dad? Like, what did you expect about being a dad? They're like, oh, nobody really said anything. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, no, I just like saw my dad or I saw my uncles and I like watched what I liked or didn't like, but nobody explicitly told me what it looked like to be a good dad. And I'm like, oh, weird, because people tell you your entire lives what it means to be a good mom. Well, I remember being like 4 years old and somebody calling me Mommy Paige because I would take care of my little brother because he was a baby and I liked playing with him. And they'd be like, oh, Mommy Paige. And so like from 4 years old, I'm thinking, okay, I would make a good mom because I'm taking care of him. Girls are babysitting. We're taking child development classes in high school. Like, why? That was an elective, but it was full of girls. It was all women in the class. So I think I start there. Specific to this conversation with your partner, I think it's really important to get familiar with the language, right? Like, what is invisible labor? Because it doesn't actually mean it's not visible. That's not what invisible labor means. So like, what is invisible labor? What is the mental load? What is domestic labor? How do we value our time thinking about these concepts? Because one of my biggest struggles, and I know one of the biggest struggles of so many women, is simply being able to communicate what they're experiencing. I am feeling burnt out because I'm doing all this invisible labor and I feel like I'm carrying the mental load for all the things that happen in the house. And yes, you're great. You do the laundry and you cook the dinners, but every time you cook dinner, you ask me what to make. And that stresses me out, right? We don't know why that stresses us out until we're able to say, like, you're putting the mental load of dinner on me, even though you said you were going to do dinner. So like, if you're doing dinner, I need you to cook the dinner. I need you to plan the dinner. I need you to know that we have the recipe in the fridge. Like, I need you to know that. And being able to articulate that, I think, is step one to having a productive conversation. Because when we don't have that language, when we can't articulate the difference between a task and the mental load associated with that task, we just end up fighting about who's cooking dinner. And then nothing really ever gets resolved.
Right.
Do you think some of this, I'm sitting here listening and thinking about, we have a great relationship. We divide tasks really, really well in our household. And we're raising two boys who we expect also to be a part of those tasks. And to me, that's a part of being aware of this, thanks to you and other creators who have brought it to my attention, because I want to make sure that we're raising young men who are good partners to whoever they choose to love in whatever way they choose to love them. But I find myself getting frustrated sometimes because I have an expectation that might not match my husband's expectation. Like my version of something being clean or folded a certain way or whatever it may be. And then I realize that I have maybe a different expectation.
Sure.
How do you work around that? Because ultimately, your partner is doing the thing, is helping. It might not just be the way you envision it.
Yeah, I think it depends on what it is, right? We can have some leeway. Everybody does things differently. Everybody has different preferences, but there's certain things where it's like objectively, right, a right and wrong way to do things, right? Like objectively,
this towel needs to be folded in threes.
But it's like, you know, the laundry, for example. If you're putting the 4-year-old's clothes in the 2-year-old's room, that's just wrong, right? You didn't take the time to look at the tags, and or you don't know what size clothes they wear, and so you've put them in the wrong room. And so now when I go to get them dressed in the morning, I don't know where their clothes are. That's frustrating, right? And you've made my life harder in that instance. To me, that's pretty objective. Like you put it in the wrong spot. Folding the towel, right? Like we can have some leeway here. But I think the important thing is like, do we have mutual respect and a willingness to listen and learn? Because there's been things that my husband has taught me, right? I remember when we were in high school, actually, I had like a bajillion keychains on my key. And he was like, you're going to break your ignition. Like, way too heavy. Take all those things off. And I didn't look at him and like get mad. I was like, oh, I didn't know that, right? It's helpful for him to teach me those things. And chances are, in most cases, when a woman is coming to her husband and she's saying, hey, I do it this way in the dishwasher because a couple of times I didn't. And when I opened up the dishwasher, the dishes were still dirty, right? I know this because I've lived this and I know this through learned experience, right? I think oftentimes there's this assumption that women are nagging for the sake of nagging and they're not. They're saying, I've done this enough times to know what works and doesn't work. I'm trying to pass on my wisdom to you. We have to have conversations. Eve Rodsky has a really nice way of saying this, which is it's standard of care. So what's the standard of care? And if you two can't agree on it, what would the average person agree to? And using that maybe as a benchmark as opposed to yours or mine. But something else I like to say for women is the reason women's standards are really high oftentimes is because they've been held to really high standards. And so the expectations for us have always been very different than those of men, right? We're in a ponytail, then we're not professional enough. If our makeup's not done, we're not professional enough, but men get to just roll out of bed and show up to work. Like that's how I think about that standard. So are her standards high unnecessarily or because she's been conditioned to have high standards and now she's holding you to those as well?
Yeah. Oh, that's so
That's
good.
the
I
clip.
love that I love that you bring that up. Yeah, that's incredible. I'm curious to know what's so fascinating to me about the conversation about the mental load and about gender equity in the home and all of this is that it still usually falls on the woman to bring this conversation to the forefront of a relationship. So I find it fascinating that also is a piece of the mental load that women have to bring forth is the feeling of inequity and how, because it impacts them more indirectly. But I'm curious to know from your perspective, if we sort of flip the script and we ask maybe a male spouse, I'm specifically thinking of stay-at-home moms because a lot of people will argue that being a stay-at-home mom is not a quote job. How men or a male partner could view the unpaid labor that a stay-at-home mom is doing and how they could maybe recognize that labor versus viewing it as something that is just you get to have fun and stay at home while I go and make all of the money for our.
Yeah. Any man who has spent time being a stay-at-home parent, even for a short period of time, will tell you it's a lot of work. Right. So my husband used to joke that he wanted to be a stay-at-home dad and then we had kids and he's like, never in a million years, I'll die. It's so much work. It's so exhausting, right? When people have to live the experience, they recognize how hard it is. The problem comes back to conditioning and messaging. Even silly things like we say, being a stay-at-home mom saves on the cost of childcare. Like we could position it as this cost savings. If your wife stays at home, she saves your family money. But we do the same thing with breastfeeding, right? It's free. Well, it's not free. It's her time. She's spending hours and hours of her life breastfeeding. That's not free. Takes time. And so we have been conditioned to view women's time as free. Their time is free and men's time is valuable. And we've placed all the value for men on their paid work. And we've told women that their most important role is in the unpaid work that they're doing. That's the most important thing they can do. But then when women do that, we tell them it's not important. You know, it's really tricky, right? We always tell women like the most important job in the world is to be a wife and a mother. And then they become a stay-at-home mom and they're like, so what do you do all day? What are you even doing? Your job isn't hard. It's interesting because I've also noticed this uptick online of these like male financial gurus who are like, oh, a stay-at-home mom will save you $300,000 a year because you're not paying for a nanny and a chef and a this and a that. And they position it as this like cost savings for the family, but they don't ever recognize that like that woman's time is still valuable. And when you take away that loss for the family, you put the woman in financial risk. She's now in a position where she's financially reliant on her partner. And the family is also financially reliant on that one partner. And so then it puts this pressure on the man to earn all the money. It's really hard to deprogram ourselves from this thinking of like our time is free. Essentially, you don't have to pay for women's time. You get this unpaid labor because that's what we're supposed to be doing, whether it's laundry, cooking, cleaning, or just simply taking care of the kids. Oftentimes, when I say invisible, it's not that you can't see the work that they're doing. It's just that you're not responsible or present for the work. You only benefit from it. And so you don't actually see how hard it is to do it all day or the time that it takes. So if you're the person who gets to come home every single day and there's dinner, and you come home every single day and there's laundry in your closet or clean clothes in your closet, you don't have to wonder how it got there. You don't worry about how it got there. You just get to benefit from the end results, right? It's just this really tricky narrative. And I want to be very clear that I think a stay-at-home mom's time is incredibly valuable. I think paid work is a necessity. But if you get paid, I don't care if you get paid $1,000 an hour and your partner's a stay-at-home mom, your time is not more valuable. Your time is not more valuable. And your ability to work that job where you get paid $1,000 an hour and your ability to have a family at the same time is only made possible by your stay-at-home partner. So you wouldn't be able to earn that income without them. And people don't really love that narrative, but I think we need to flip that switch, which is not that she's lucky to stay home. He's lucky to have her staying at home, right? Like the family is lucky to have that support system. She wasn't just sitting around all day long. She was working. And so how do we share the work when we're home together?
One thing, especially if you're a woman and you're getting married and this is something you and your partner are thinking about as a future for both of you. So interestingly enough, my mom was a nail tech. She owned her own business. She did women's nails. And most of those women were stay-at-home wives, stay-at-home moms who came from affluent families. And over the course of 20 years, she watched so many of those women find themselves in positions where they either found out their husband was having an affair or they just simply wanted a divorce. It wasn't a healthy marriage anymore. And they were having to like secretly siphon money so that they could afford a lawyer. I mean, just there are so many different scenarios that you never plan to find yourself in, but you can. And in that event, if you have spent the majority of your marital time staying at home, then there should be some sort of only yours financial compensation for that.
Yeah.
Just as, and you know what? If that day never comes, great. When you guys are old and gray, take yourself on a cruise around the world. But until then, make sure you have set yourself up for whatever may come your way.
Right.
Well, it's also not just divorce either, right? Like death, disability, anything can happen. Your partner gets laid off or is disgraced at work. Who knows, right? Anything can happen. And so I do think it's really important to be prepared financially. A lot of women will tell you that they have an allowance from their husband, which I think is a scary place to be in, where you don't have access and you're not being compensated in the same way they are, even though, again, your staying at home has given them the ability to do what they're doing, because without you, they can't do that. And so that money really should be a shared income, a family income, as are all the expenses, right? And so I think it's really important, to have that perspective also, that anything can happen. You want to be able to provide for yourself, for your children, if you have them, and just have that safety net. Because when you don't, it can feel really dangerous and scary to not have access.
Yeah, totally. I was just having this conversation with my sister over the weekend about how I know, several people who financially receive the quote allowances from their spouse, or who maybe don't even have established credit very much because they have just sort of relied on, their spouse to pay the credit card bill. They put everything on the credit card and then they pay the bill. Whereas, I feel very lucky that my spouse and I, in our marriage, I have always just done the financial stuff. And I've always been the one to sort of take care of that, because I'm like very type A and weird about making sure I know all of that information. And so I often think to myself, money it's not about necessarily having the ability to go out and buy whatever it is I want to buy. It's about having options. It's about having the ability to make a choice if I get to that point. And so I feel like a lot of women don't have that ability because of the financial aspect and the reliance on their spouse.
And I think it's something people don't want to think about or talk about, but it's the number one conversation we should be having before marriage. Oh, well, not the number one, but top conversation we should be having before we marry someone, for sure. But I'm sure you've seen it floating around the internet recently, where it's like, we're kind of the first generation of women to truly have our own financial freedom, whereas our mothers didn't really have that. If we have the ability to have that financial freedom and financial control and ability to earn money and have our own bank accounts and all those things, like, who are we to give that up when so many women who came before us just did not have that opportunity at all? And so I look at it through that lens as well, which is like, okay, this is my right. I want to have a bank account with just my name on it and nobody else's, and have that be mine. And I think my husband's never cared, right? Like, cause I think he's secure in the fact that, like, we're in this together. And if I were to choose to leave, then that's the choice that I'm making. Right. But like, I don't think that should be a deterrent to anybody in marriage to want to have that safety net.
Yeah.
Well, part of that also is why we're in the space that we're in politically. Women no longer are in positions to need spouses, partners, men.
No.
Now it's an actual choice who you choose to spend your life with and how you choose to spend your time with that partner. And I think that's why we're seeing such a shift back toward the traditional wife, trad wife, and people saying things like women should just have more children, stay at home, etc. So what do you say to someone who might argue that women are biologically meant to, quote, stay at home, be a caregiver, have babies?
I would say that that's just never been the case anyways. This is it's propaganda. Most women have always worked. Most women have always been employed. Always. Women have been always working. So it's this kind of false narrative that the most privileged white women have had. They were stay-at-home moms, maybe, but it was a privileged group of people and women who were in that position. The majority of women worked. And I think I just saw something recently that it was really a short period of time. I think probably like the 90s to 2000s where women were like becoming stay-at-home moms, and that like sense that they had kind of the autonomy to make that decision and choose that decision. Whereas before it was like privilege or not privileged. And if you weren't privileged, you didn't have the luxury to stay at home. And so it's so interesting that we keep saying like America great again and like have women stay at home like the 50s. And it's like, my grandmothers both worked. Every woman I've ever known in my life has worked. Many women have just been doing unpaid work. They're working for their husband's businesses, unpaid, right? They're working for a family business, unpaid. It's never really been true, even in the tradwife sense of the term, right? Nara Smith is working. Ballerina Farm, she's working. Hannah Nealman's working. They're all working. Everybody's working. And so who's getting paid for the work? That depends. But women have always worked. So I think what's happening right now is there's two things happening. There's a red pill of men, and we're telling them that equality is actually oppression and women's rights have made their lives worse and they're lonely and they're sad and it's all our fault. There's that narrative. And I think the data also shows on that, you'll have to fact check me, but that they're not much lonelier than women in studies. Men aren't actually much lonelier. It's just they're like really latching on to the idea of loneliness. So there's that. And that's coming up against women who are done doing all of the unpaid labor, being the wife, the mother, the full-time caretaker, earning a full-time salary, doing all that. The girl boss lean in culture. Women are saying, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted by modern marriage and motherhood and expectations because I was told I could do it all and be it all and have it all. And I can't, and I'm burnt out. And so something's got to give. Either I'm getting divorced or I have to leave my job or I don't know what's going to happen. And I think this trad wife idea is being served up to women. And we're saying like, hey, look, you don't have to answer those stupid emails. You don't have to sit in the fluorescent lights. Come over here where you can just be with your kids and not be stressed anymore. But when you talk to women who have made that choice, they are no less stressed. They have no more support. They are just as stressed, just as exhausted, and just as frustrated with the system because all of the things that were true before they left their jobs are still true after they leave them. And so they're still doing all the domestic labor. Now they're doing all the caretaking. Now they have no financial freedom. Now they have no safety net. Now they are doing all of that work without any of the freedom that came with having the job. And so many women are saying, how about instead of that, no kids, no husband, right? I'm not going to do those things because those are the things that feel like a trap. I think that's what a lot of women feel like. That feels like a trap. It feels like you're luring women down this ideal that ultimately just burns them out and creates this amount of work that they can't sustain. And
well, I think we're also seeing a trend of women saying, I just got divorced and my workload stayed the same. So,
or less,
or less, right?
Yeah.
But we all three of us, it seems, are in healthy relationships where we communicate with our partners. We're at different stages of child rearing. And the goal here is to hopefully encourage other women and other partners to not get there, right? To have this conversation, to open up the floor and to, open up that dialogue between them and their partners. So thank you, Paige, for helping us do that today.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's possible if you have a partner that's willing and able to have these conversations and to try and break down these ideas that are so deeply ingrained in us. And so, that's really the core of it. I don't think this is an individual issue. I really think it's important for every husband and wife to know that, it's not necessarily your fault that you fell into the trap, right? It's not you married the wrong guy. It's not that he's a bad guy. It's that we've all been conditioned to show up in a specific way that's no longer working for the way that the world works. And we have the opportunity to change that. And what better place to change it than within our homes? And when we have that support and change at home, we have more capacity to advocate for change outside of our homes and for equity outside of our homes. But when we're drowning at home, it feels really hard to do anything outside of it. And so I know we're all just trying to build a better future for ourselves and our kids. And I think it starts with us. So if you can have these conversations, if you can approach it, you asked me earlier kind of how to have a productive conversation. My biggest piece of advice is get on the same page about what your goal is. Like, what's the goal? Is it to have more time for one another? Is it to be happier? Is it to maybe you just want recognition? Maybe you don't even need your partner to do more chores. And so get on the same page about the goal, because if you're on the same page about the goal and you guys are fighting towards a common good, right, for the benefit of your family, you're less likely to feel like you're fighting against each other.
Yeah. Team mentality for sure. Thank you so much, Paige. This episode is brought to you by the 100% women-owned and run brand Basic. Since 2016, Basic has empowered connection and conscious consumption among folks who believe that what we buy and wear should align with our values. From Southern makers to global fair trade brands, all apparel, art, and decor at Basic is responsibly made by individuals paid living wages within dignified working spaces. Basic also believes that businesses play an integral role in improving conditions, opportunities, and resources for others. As such, they donate a portion of every sale to human rights efforts. You can visit Basic in person in downtown Birmingham, Alabama, or shop at www.abasicshop.com. Use code PRETTYFURIOUS for 15% off your first purchase. We have a little game that we like to play with our guests that is called Fury or Fun, where we list off a few things and you tell us if they make you furious, if you think they're fun, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to start with the first one, and I heard you hint at this earlier, so I suspect that I know your answer already, which is Fair Play, the book, and the card game.
Fun.
Amazing. We love it. I bring up Fair Play to literally anybody who will listen, and the documentary as well. I tell all my friends about it all the time. It's incredible. I think that's might be a great place that you might suggest to start for people, is to like watch that documentary, read the book.
Even if you can't read the book, Eve has done like a million podcasts. I think listening to Eve Rodsky, the author, she's amazing. And then there's some other books too, like Fed Up or Emotional Labor. They're all good books on this topic. I think Fair Play is amazing. It's what really jump-started my journey on this. It was listening to Eve on a podcast and then ultimately reading her book and doing the game. I think, in my opinion, there's a lot more that happens over the years of having these conversations. Like Fair Play is a really good place to start, though.
Yeah, totally.
All right,
Cool.
Up next. I thought of this because I came home from New York yesterday. Plane rides.
Ay. Fury.
They're just falling out of the
I
sky.
have a plane ride next week, so let's.
I know. I have like 3 flights I have to book, and I'm like holding off. I need to book them.
Okay, our next one is Miss Usha Vance. So a lot of people have like dubbed her as ultimate working mom because she had this amazing career and she was just insanely successful next to her husband, and her husband was actually not really in the spotlight for many years. So I'm curious to know, what are the vibes around her?
Yeah, I mean, Fury for me, but I think I think she's a woman who's helping to uphold the patriarchy, right? Like, I think she's an incredibly intelligent person, and she knows what she's doing, right? And she's chosen to kind of stand beside this. And I think that is, I think it speaks volumes, and I think it's intentional, obviously. And I think it's proximity to power. I don't know much about Usha in particular. I haven't done a deep dive, but I think even just the arc of who JD was versus who JD is now, it just kind of shows this, person who's kind of aligned himself with power and money. And I feel like Usha's kind of been next to him for that journey.
Yeah, totally.
I feel like she got used, and it won't be long before she's dismissed.
I agree. I think
she's good for the narrative. Yeah, it's good for the narrative. But I don't know. I don't want to discredit her by saying that she's not like aware, right?
Yeah,
like I think she is aware. Yeah, at least that's my vibes.
Yeah, someone that intelligent has to be, right? Like, she's incredibly smart. And
I've never heard her speak, so I don't know.
Maybe not.
That's
true. All right. Family vlogging channels.
Oh, Fury. I hate. Hate for so many reasons. Obviously, child exploitation is like the number one. Yeah.
Agreed.
I'm reading House of My Mother right now by Sherry Frankie. And
oh my gosh.
I didn't have any context going into the book. I just kind of
ordered it. Okay.
And didn't know about her family or anything like that. And, have heard a little bit about connections, but didn't really make the connection to her story or anything. And oh my God, I was just like, I'm about halfway through, and it is the most asinine shit I've ever heard of, like, what that woman made her family do. So
Yeah. And even people who are not abusive to their kid, or Ruby Frankie's like, awful,
oh,
awful, awful. But I think even the people that you love and they're like, it's just cute and fun and all those things, right? As a person who is public on the internet, it's a really violent place to be. Like there's a lot of awful stuff that happens online, and you have to have thick skin and a good therapist, hopefully, to deal with it. And when I see comments that are left about children, or content that is made about children, I know how hard it is for me to show up online. I cannot imagine a child unwillingly being subjected to all of that, even if it has good intentions overall.
Okay, our last one is I'm curious to know your thoughts on Kite Baby and the entire like debacle that happened with them last year, and sort of their like trying to rebrand and sort of just like forget about all of that. So I would love to know your thoughts on Kite Baby.
So I am an adoptive mother. And so I think a lot of people thought that I would have a lot of empathy for the adoptive mother, which I do. I do have empathy for her. However, I have a unique perspective where I know that most women give up their babies because they can't afford them. Right. So most women give up their babies because they can't afford them. And this woman, who is kind of a privileged white woman adopting someone else's baby, was able to raise thousands and thousands of dollars to help her with her paid leave to adopt this baby. And we live in a society that would never fundraise for the birth mother in the same way. Right. So when this initially came up, I chose not to speak about Kite Baby specifically because I don't know that I have opinions on it. But I don't know if I have enough information, right?
Totally.
Truly on like everything that happened and how it came to be. Ultimately, though, for me, the bigger story was the way that we view motherhood in our country and how we often shame women who have children that they can't afford, but then we'll fundraise for women who can't afford to adopt. Right.
Yeah.
And so we don't have the same tolerance typically for women of color or underprivileged women that we have for privileged white women who want to adopt someone else's baby. And that was an interesting part of the story for me.
Totally. No, that's such an interesting and personal take too, for yourself and your own story. And like, I don't think many people maybe even considered that narrative. Why would that be a narrative we consider usually? But wow, I really, really like that. That's fascinating. And
yeah.
So at the beginning of the show, we always talk about a product we can't live without this week. So Maggie and I have ours. Do you have a product for us that you just simply cannot live without?
Yeah, it's my water bottle. It's like my appendage. Like if I don't have my water, if anybody wants to know, it's the Owala free sip. I think it's like with the straw, but also it's amazing. You can drink like a straw, or you can drink normal without a straw, which is great. You have an option both ways. It's my favorite. I have like a couple of them. I rotate through them. It's my favorite thing, and I don't go anywhere without it. Not even like if I'm going upstairs, I'm bringing it with me. Like I have to have it with me. So it's my all-time favorite product.
Amazing. I love it. That was actually Mallory brought her water bottle as her favorite product on our last episode.
What kind is it?
So I have a Brita filtered water bottle.
Very fancy.
Very, very into it.
Interesting. I'll have to look in. I don't think I'll change, but I will look into it regardless.
Listen, we're going to rename the podcast Pretty Furious and Hydrated. Because we're 2 for 2 on water.
You got to keep the skin glowing. Okay.
That's what I said. I was like, it's my favorite beauty product because water is the best thing for you.
Yes, it is. And we never drank it as kids, but look at us now. At least we're hydrated now.
Oh, man. Well, thanks, Paige, so much for being here. I feel energized after this conversation, actually, and excited to start some conversations in my own household, and hope other people have learned ways to get that conversation started too. You're on the same team. What's the end goal?